Smiling Faces, and we have a sold-out event tonight, which is fabulous. Thank you for coming. I am Brooke Warner. I am on the board. I have actually been on the board for the full 11 years, and yes, and I am feeling the vibe is so excellent this year, so thank you for being a part of that. Okay, now we're bringing everyone on stage. This year's festival is this incredible musical celebration that we're doing. Tonight you get to hear from Oddity, which is so exciting. I was listening to them practice earlier and it was fabulous, so you're in for a treat. This is brought to you by the Bushwick Book Club of Oakland, and I do want to read this because it is important. It's a talented group of Bay Area musicians from diverse genres, and importantly, Oddity has composed an original song that is inspired by Judith Butler's work. And so it's very special and we appreciate that so much. And again, these are original songs made for the books. So please, a round of applause for Oddity. And then after Oddity is done, MK will be taking over. MK is your moderator. MK Chavez is an author, educator, and creative coach, and author of Dear Animal and Mothermorphosis. So again, such a talented group, and thank you all so much.
How is everybody doing today out in this crowd? So I think it is a little funny in retrospect that after writing a song about to sing a song about gender, I just got into a fender bender. So life's kind of crazy, isn't it? I'm kind of curious, who here is queer in the crowd? There's queer. Wow. Who's trans or gender diverse in some way? Wow. I think that is perhaps the true percentage of our population that is queer. No bias whatsoever. Anyway, anybody like hip hop? Anybody like hip hop? All right, well, here we go. Hope you enjoy. They say, gender ain't this, gender ain't that. Saying gender ain't shit, gender ain't crap. But gender is freedom, gender is love, gender is fly, gender is tough. When push comes to shove, gender is tender, gender is care. Gender is the root and the trunk, the leaves up in the air. Ay, reaching towards skies up above, with a Molotov and a dove. Ayo, we've been going on for generations. Queer existence and a resistance all across the nations. Set them free so they paint us as a devastation. Obfuscating powers of self-determination. I'm in a rage when I be hearing what the Vatican said. Who gives a shit when they're bad in the bed, sad in the head, last of the dregs, huh? They can call us devilish. Y'all see who's meddling, the lies that they peddling. It ain't about better than, lesser than, bluer than, redder than, but fuck colonial settling, come on, hey. You know we getting it on, found the path between freer and phenom, so come on, hey, yeah. We tapped into the source now, carrying the torch now, ever marching forth now. We are warriors and bodhisattvas, cause you got me and I got you, hey. Cause gender is love, gender is free, gender is the air that we breathe, the water we drink. It's the feelings we feel, the thoughts that we think, beyond the blue, white, and pink. Come on, ay. Cause gender is everything and nothing at all. Gender's what we feel and what we standing up tall. Gender is the shine in your eyes, it's the lived and divine, how we cross the divide, ay. But what is gender when land isn't back and our people ain't free? I said, come on. What is gender when we're wondering what's genuine? I said, What is genuine? Genuine when land isn't back, when no one is free. What is gender? When we're killed in the street, when we're caught in the heat. I'll repeat, I'm seeking the peace. Come on, hey, transgender, that's spiritual. Non-binary, that shit is spiritual. Third gender, that shit is spiritual. Intersex, two-spirit, that shit is spiritual. Come on, gender fluid, shit is spiritual. Agender, post-gender, no gender, more gender. But we ain't fucking with your agenda. So why don't you just stop pretending? Cause I said, gender is you, gender is me, gender is nothing at all, gender is free. Come on, we limitless and expansive, so stop making us so phantasmic. I said, it's gender as a means, gender as the stock and the beans, beyond what it seems. Come on, gender is our wildest dreams, when we're all living free. Come on, hey. Cause gender is love, gender is free, gender is the air that we breathe, the water we drink. Gender is the feelings we feel, beyond the blue, white, and pink. Come on, hey, cause gender is everything and nothing at all. Gender is what we feel it when we standing up tall. Gender is the shine of your eyes, it's the lived and divine, how we cross the divide. Come on. Judith Butler, please. Thank you so much. Bay Area Book Festival. Don't worry, I'm not gonna go there. Thank you so much. Our beautiful rest of your day.
You know, you're at a really good event when one of the people in the front of the room has inspired that kind of music. Thank you so much. It is super exciting to be here. I am a little nervous because I really admire both of these human beings, and it's just, yeah, it's, you know, the kind of stuff that makes you nervous. So I'm gonna do an introduction. Also, you know, when you're short, you're like, trying to figure out, like, do I sit back? Do I sit forward? Big guy in mind. All right, Judith Butler doing all of the things, including helping me get more comfortable up here. Okay, I'm going to introduce these wonderful, amazing people. So Judith Butler's writing has long been a lodestar for so many of us, offering not just theory, but an invitation to live more fully, to question more deeply, to imagine more bravely. For me personally, encountering Judith's work was like opening a door. It opened my mind to possibilities I hadn't dared to think of. In the documentary An Examined Life, Judith asked a question that continues to reverberate in my own life today. If gender is a construct, does it make it less real, or does it give us more agency to build the lives we want? That question is a provocation, a doorway, a portal, a challenge to the ways that we've been taught to see ourselves and others. Judith's influence can be felt everywhere, in movements for gender justice, in the language of protest, in the whispered conversations of our friends trying to name their truth. Their writing insists that our bodies are never just our own, that we carry the marks of power and history, and that they are also sites of resistance and reimagination. Here in the Bay Area, a place where radical ideas have always had fertile ground, Judith's presence tonight feels especially resonant. One of our community members. It's a chance to be here with them and explore some discourse around gender identity in the world that we find ourselves in today. To explore the ethical compass of these times. Judith's work reminds us that undoing restrictive norms is not an act of erasure, it's an act of expansion. It's about wielding the field of possibility for all of us, and that widening that makes hope. Please join me in giving Judith a really, really warm welcome, and really loud, like make it. I want to introduce our other amazing being up here, and I'm going to start by just saying that yesterday I did a workshop, and in that workshop I said, it was a workshop for political poetry, political writing, and I said, you know, if you're here to write polemic work, well, it's the wrong workshop, but we're going to write political work, but we're going to use intimacy, and we're going to really open up. Because when we open ourselves up, when we put ourselves out there, we create the kind of work that gets under your skin, that changes you on a cellular level. That is how I feel about this person and their book. I read their book, and I've been carrying that book around in my head. It's been haunting me in the most beautiful ways. Adams Never Touch is a luminous meditation on the porousness of reality and identity. In it, she invites us to imagine parallel worlds that resist strictures of gender and surveillance of the state. But this is more than fiction. In Misha's hands, speculative storytelling becomes a tool of survival, a map for navigating the uncertainties of our time. Beyond the page, Misha is a tireless activism. Whether teaching, community building, creating art that intervenes in the system that polices our lives, her work pulses with urgency of of color poetics, a refusal to be contained, a commitment to making spaces of care and possibility where there were none before. In a world that often tries to reduce us to a single story, Misha's writing and activism insist on the abundance of our lives, the many selves that we hold, the many worlds we can create together. Her work is an offering to the future, a reminder that technology and art are not separate from our survival, but intimately woven into it. Here in the spirit of the Bay Area's long tradition of artistic resistance and community and dreaming, Misha's presence is always a call to action and a call to wonder. It's a reminder that we are never finished becoming, and that the boundaries that have been drawn around us can be redrawn. Thank you, Misha. So many questions, but I'm really tired of hearing my own voice, so I'm actually going to ask Judith and Misha if they would like to read.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Wow, that was the most beautiful intro anyone has ever done for me. Have a poet do your intro. Yes. Wow, amazing. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit of Adams Never Touch. But I also just wanted to say Free Palestine. Absolutely So I'm going to jump into chapter 4 because I think it relates to this moment. So it's a T for T book. It's about two Latina trans women falling in love and in the middle of emergence of fascism. Right after the election of somebody very similar to Trump, but just not named that way. So this is the day after the election, or yes. The next day I was devastated. After so many months of healing from intense loss, after trying so hard to regain my sense of self, what had I slipped into this horrific dystopian timeline? It felt profoundly unfair. I did not believe in any God, but I did believe that for all the effort put into quantum physics, cosmology, and theoretical physics, these explanations still could not account for most of the workings of the miracles that are our universes. But that day I was even furious at the universe. How could this unprecedented surge of hate be the unfolding spirit of the universe? Nothing made sense. My hope at finding any answers about myself was lost in the sudden incomprehensibility of the people around me, half of whom had voted for this violent, misogynist buffoon. I received a text from my dear friend Sandra. Hey, Ria, come join me downtown at the protest. We're at Figueroa and Pico. This is in Los Angeles. I canceled my classes and drove to meet her. I couldn't be alone, crying on my couch. I had to be with people. I was grateful to be in a city with so many other Latinx people. It was a city where the election of this man who had associated our people with rapists, when he himself was one, was met with massive outrage. People were flooding the streets en masse, waving Mexican flags, covering their faces with bandanas, driving lowriders alongside the march. We marched for hours, keeping our chants simple for all the folks, all the people who were there marching for the first time and didn't know the more fun but elaborate beats of chants from other movements. When Sandra had to leave, I stayed with the march. We marched up and down hills, the march leaders routing around the police whenever they tried to stop our march at an intersection. At one point, deep in downtown on Flower and 11th, we could see the lights of police cars coming from far away, slowly, as we realized another march with hundreds of people in it was marching towards our contingent to join us. Our march was already around 1,000 people strong before even stopping to allow them to come down 11th and merge with ours. My voice was hoarse from chanting. The march had been so impulsive, nobody even thought to bring a bullhorn. These are not experienced organizers so much as they were people who had thought that activism was hopeless until now. Maybe they still thought it was hopeless, but there seemed to be a collective need to scream and cry in public together. That's when I noticed her. Also standing just outside the crowd, a Latina woman whose muscular, tattoo-covered arms were revealed by her Black Lives Matter t-shirt, the sleeves of which she had stylishly cut off herself. Flowers trailed down her gorgeous brown arms, connected by curves resembling the traces of particles like pions, the result of high-speed collisions produced in accelerators and supernovas, which exist only briefly when a high-energy proton collides with another particle. I felt myself still in that moment as I looked at her. Her eyes locked on the police. She was wearing earbuds. Her eyes were glassy, like she was looking at something I couldn't see, and her fingers were twitching busily. It looked like she was using a keyboard that I couldn't see. Surely she had AUG lenses and was recording this entire scene. The rays of light and shadow scanning across her body alternated from red to blue and white, creating a cacophony of angles that she seemed unmoved by. Her beauty was unfolding in my consciousness as I noticed how close she was standing to the police, even as they were violently pushing people back with their electric bicycles. She was close enough to see their badge numbers, or at least those whose badge numbers were not covered with black tape, as most were that night. The chanting, the sirens, and the helicopter all faded away as she held a stillness that mirrored my own. In the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, many of the impossibilities that quantum mechanics presents, such as action at a distance and the uncertainty of particle locations, are solved by the idea that in any quantum experiment with multiple possible outcomes, outcomes exist in different universes. Quantum entanglement is the phenomenon of two particles that can be separated across vast distances, yet the quantum states of one particle still correlate to changes in the other. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance. Almost any event can be a quantum experiment, such as a flickering light bulb, as evidence that even light exists in packets or quanta. I'm getting to the end of this excerpt here. Still, moments like this one have always felt to me like experiments of particular relevance. How can we ever know all the possible outcomes and variables that contributed to the meeting of two people? What quantum effects happen in the moment when the police car's red light flashes off her body and sends that image to my brain, resulting in this powerful attraction? What patterns of shape, like the movement of her hair, reach the neural networks in my hippocampus, interact with my memory, and create this feeling of warmth down my body? How does this context of this political moment and her act of resistance within it register in that pattern recognition and interact with all the work I've done on myself to heal and build healthy relationship patterns in such a way that I decide to walk toward her? Thank you.
Thank you, Misha. That was wonderful. You have a life-affirming approach to devastation. And that's great, because that's inspirational, right? It's fabulous. We all need that, and thank you. That was a gift. I'm really glad to be here today. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your lovely introduction. I have to tell you that 8 weeks ago, I took a fall on an ice skating rink in New York City, and ice is very hard. And I'm nearly 70 and haven't had a bone density test in a while, but I gather it's not what it used to be, my bones. Okay. So it's been rough. I've been without a sling, but I have to tell you that one of the hardest things for me to do, because I broke the upper humerus, is to sign my name. So I'm really sorry that I'm not going to sign today. I have tried, and I get through 10, and then I'm in pain. And since I'm pretty sure you don't want me to, well, some of you might want me to. Okay, for those of you who want me to be in pain and just sign, I'm sorry, I'm not doing it. But if you see me on the street, I will, in a few weeks' time, because I do live right here, I will sign anything you have around, okay? I do need a couple weeks, or if yeah, okay, I'm sorry, okay. All right, so your remarks, Misha, led me to this decision, not to read from Who's Afraid of Gender, which was written before the current administration, and even, for the most part, before the attack on Gaza. So it feels like it belongs to another world, although it is foreseeing this world. But I thought I'd read to you something that's more of a postscript, but in its spirit. And thank you for that spiritual thing. I think that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Thank you. In the weeks after his inauguration, the announcement of a series of executive orders became a flurry of shock and destruction. We were all disoriented. We saw progressive laws, civil rights movements, constitutional democracy attacked, and we have seen that in a disarming and disorienting way since that time. We didn't yet know how profound the attack on universities would be, or on cultural and social movements. We understood that the attack on trans rights was almost immediate. The attack on gender as a concept, or as a movement, or as part of policy, including anti-discrimination law or policy opposed to gender-based violence, that all of this would not only be attacked through rhetorical vitriol, but nullified in the law or reversed in the law. And I think one of the things we are seeing, and what we saw first, almost like an introduction to what is to come, is the existential nullification of trans people in the law, right? You are not who you think you are. You are not able to determine yourself. Now let's remember that if Trump's government says that sex is immutable and you can't change yours, that's a policy statement. It's an executive order. It has legal status until it's challenged and reversed. Okay. So if they're saying sex is immutable, you can say, but the law is mutable. Right? Let's remember the law is mutable, because he might think he's following divine law and telling us that God created male and female, and that he's just recording that saying, right? He's the vessel for that saying. But we have a rejoinder, and we also have the possibility of civil disobedience, and we do not live fully within the terms of the law. We have never fully lived fully within the terms of the law. The law does not have the capacity to deny us our powers of self-government. Anyway, I think one of the things we've seen is a self-amplifying state power bent now on overcoming checks and balances of the rule of law, testing the limits of authoritarian power, and testing to see whether more authoritarian powers can be claimed. The speed with which all that happened was terrifying and disorienting. And those who waved it all away or saw problems of implementation or told us we have nothing to really worry about, they weren't right. Those who saw the certain end to democracy in sight claimed to be realistic or maybe cynical. They gave up the struggle in advance, noting the authoritarian playbook and its predictable scripts. They said, oh yeah, we saw this coming, it was bound to come, here it is, it's just the same. It's like, no, it's not a moment for cynicism, because democracy has not yet shown us what it can be. We're holding out for a radical democracy. We are not living with or accepting a compromise. And I think really that the capacity to have love in the face of devastation, or to allow devastation turn you toward love, desire, affirmation, the capacity to insist on an even more radical democracy than the one they are undoing now is part of our impossible and necessary task. You know, people say, oh, you're such an idealist. And it's like, yeah, somebody better be. Right? Because if you tell me I'm supposed to give that up and not imagine a future, what are you telling me? I should destroy my powers of imagination? I should destroy whatever there is left in me of hope? That I should change my practices to adjust to the current realistic political climate and start deciding which compromises I'm going to make? I don't think so. You know, and we've seen a lot of organizations upon which many of us, artists, activists, scholars, depend. The National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities. I've signed amicus briefs in 2 lawsuits taking on each of those organizations for so quickly agreeing to implement the anti-gender policies of the Trump administration, for implementing the anti-DEI policies. And let's be clear, DEI is not just about hiring and personnel and reviews, it's also about race. It's an attack on people of color. What made you ever think you could be equal? What made you ever think you were welcome? What made you ever think that white people need to be involved in radical reparation for a history of anti-black racism, for a history of colonial racism. No, they were saying no to all of that. So let's remember DEI is an abbreviation, but it carries all of that. It carries all of that. But what I wanted to tell you as well is that nonprofits are being threatened for hosting grants, fellowships, collaborative activities on Palestine, since they depend on the federal tax breaks to maintain their nonprofit status and their solvency. So some of the most generous nonprofit organizations, some of the most supportive nonprofit organizations are being strong-armed into silence on Palestine. But we will fight, we are fighting. But it is really important to ask yourself, if you're part of a nonprofit that is being asked to compromise in this way, who will you be after you compromise in this way? What will be left of you? What will you have become? And can you live with that? And if you cannot, then you shut it down or make it minimal and wait it out and find your new strategy and find your new collectives, your new collaboration, fight for the arts, fight for literature, the humanities, fight for it all, but do it in smart collaborations, through the law, outside the law. I think we have to worry about the realists among us. I mean, I'm a realist about strategy to a degree, but I'm also willing to fail if my point got across, right? I mean, failure's not the worst thing, because you just pick yourself up, you find some beautiful woman across the room, I don't know. Right, something's waiting. Okay. I just want to say this about the hideous executive order issued on January 20th. I mean, the guy was barely through the door, defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truths, capital T, to the federal government. That last part is really peculiar. You're going to restore biological truth to the federal government? Well, first of all, how can women need defense from gender, given that women as a plural category is a gendered category, arguably the first and most important one in the history of gender studies and policy? I mean, Catherine McKinnon, I finally agree with her after all these years. When I published Who's Afraid of Gender, I noted that the campaign against gender ideology was very late to arrive in the US. Well, in the last few years, it had a life in conservative evangelical churches, in the CPAC conferences, where seminars were dedicated yearly, monthly, to combating something called gender ideology. The term itself was coined by the Vatican back in the 1990s. It was taken up in Latin America by both Catholic and evangelical churches, mending a rift between them, publicized as an urgent topic at the World Congress of Families, especially in 2017, when Trump representatives attended. It also appeared as an incendiary topic in presidential campaigns in Costa Rica, Uganda, South Korea, Taiwan, France, Italy, Argentina, and Brazil, to name but a few. But the US press hardly noticed it, and I mean, what was gender here? It was just some box, you check. Viktor Orban from Hungary, allied with the Russian Orthodox Church in condemning gender ideology, and in turn, Putin declared his undying fidelity to J.K. Rowling, whose critique of trans rights in 2022 sought to establish that gender freedoms associated with the West were a threat to Russia's spiritual essence and national security. So, she did do the right thing and said, no, thank you for the alliance, but she had already set it up. The anti-gender ideology movement was developed over the tenure of the last two popes. And I think we have to remind ourselves that Francis, despite his occasional progressivism, accelerated the discourse insisting that gender was a threat to man, woman, and their differences, to civilization, the family, and the natural order of human relations, casting gender as a demonic power analogous to the Ebola virus or Hitler Youth, his words. Okay, so I'm sorry that he left the world, but okay. All right, I'm just going to be really brief. I'm sorry. Okay, so Trump comes to this happy fascist party in 2018 when he attempted to instruct the Department of Health and Human Services to declare sex an immutable feature of human personhood, leaning into the Vatican's invocation of natural law. Okay, you hear immutable, you hear Vatican. Okay. At that time, his administration claimed that genitalia and plain language were the two criteria to be used in determining sex. So no linguistic coinage, ever. Plain language, plain for whom, and genitalia, which is, in his mind, unambiguous, and which we know from intersex studies and from all the difficulties that international sports organizations have had in coming up with a clear and unambiguous, distinction, is not as plain or obvious as he would have it. In any case, his immediate goal was, of course, to block trans people from gaining protections under sex discrimination under Title IX, the legal instrument that sex discrimination, that secures protections against sex discrimination in any federally funded activity. That didn't work for a variety of reasons, but there was a court case in 2021 called Bostock v. Clayton, where the question was explicitly posed to the Supreme Court whether discriminatory treatment against trans people can be considered legally as sex discrimination. Interestingly, Neil Gorsuch, hardly a progressive character, said, well, if you're discriminated against on the basis of the sex assigned at birth, or you're discriminated against on the basis of the sex acquired in time, they're both equally sex discrimination. And that has posed a deep problem for the Trump administration. because it was written into law. And what that means is that whatever they try to do is potentially contestable under this particular legal decision. Okay, I have one last semi-comic, tragic thing to say. In 2018, Trump's legal team shifts from identifying the immutable features of sex as genitalia to gametes. So now they say it's gametes that makes the difference. What does it mean that one can change one's mind about what exactly is immutable? I mean, the first apparently was not immutable, I mean, it changed. We changed. The existence of intersexed people, which is systematically denied by this administration, has posed a problem for sex assignment, given that genitalia can be combined or mixed in some ways. Gametes, apparently, were supposed to be less problematic for the right, less than genitalia and plain language. I took that one personally. Okay, with the gametes, this is my final remark. With the gametes, there's a larger one and there's a smaller one, okay? Everything is clear, plain language, large, small. And that is the immutable difference between female and male. Only problem is the smaller one emerged from the larger one. So the larger one is primary, suggesting that all sex is originally female. Not the conclusion they hope to see. because they also want to say that God created male and female, and that the complementarity thesis within the Vatican, right, there's no human without that fundamental difference, right? The human is dual. Anybody who messes with that is messing with the human itself. And it's dual, and it's given at birth as dual. It's God created us as a dual kind of creature, not internally, but separately. So they wanted their creationism enshrined in law, and here they have produced a problem, because if it's originally female, the male is not created along with the female at the beginning of things, so God was wrong. Okay, but here's the other thing I want to say. No one can consult a gamete at the moment of sex assignment, right? Infant comes into the world, they go, oh my God, what's the sex? We have to decide. You can't consult a gamete at the moment of sex assignment, or even at conception, so it doesn't function as a criterion that you can use. Gametes are not observable. Thus, to base sex assignment on gametes is to rely on an imperceptible dimension of sex at the moment when observation still remains the main instrument for sex assignment. And with genitalia, it was supposed to be easy to observe and to name, but that always depended on the lens through which one sees, and the ability not to see complexity when it appears. Indeed, various scientists from the Society for the Study of Evolution or the Association for the Study of Developmental Biology have said, you know what? Extensive scientific evidence contests what the government is doing. In fact, the Evolutionary Society said sex is a biological construct that relies on a combination of chromosomes, hormonal balances, and the resulting expression of gonads, external genitalia, and secondary sex characteristics. And there is variation in all of these biological attributes, and perhaps the most important point, sex and gender result from the interplay of genetics and environment, genetic and epigenetic factors, interplay, interaction, co-construction. We are all built from that over time, and our freedom is also in that mix. So let me just say that in the end, there's a question whether we affirm human complexity, which is on an important spectrum with animal complexity. We are human animals after all. We are human creatures among creatures after all. Do we affirm that complexity, that dynamic, changing form of complexity, that form of complex, interactive becoming that we are? Or do we stop it in its tracks and put it in a binary and say that it's original and return in that way biological truth to the federal government, which now, alone, without any scientific well, I should say, without any credible scientific contribution, has decided, has authorized itself to define the sex you are, and to define the sex anyone can be. So that is really what that does. Who gets to decide sex? Who gets to determine sex? The federal government, at the expense of every self-determining creature on this earth, every complex self-determining creature in this world. So we have a choice. Do we affirm complexity, human-animal complexity, or do we deny it? And they say, deny it. Deny it in the face of all we know, historically, scientifically, culturally. So let us be in favor of the affirmation of complexity. Let us make it into a radical hope and a radical practice. Thank you.
So it occurs to me that hope comes in all sorts of different forms, and one of them, to me, is humor. So thank you for that, Judith. Because on one side, I have Judith reading some horrible, horrible things and being able to make us laugh while we consider the changes that have been thrust upon us. And on my other side, I have somebody who read a passage that, you know, made me all fluttery and it's romantic. It's romantic and full of love, and that is hope too. So, with that in mind, what I'd like to ask both of you is, the theme of this event, this whole weekend, is changing the narrative. And so, how do we go about changing the narrative? How do we approach this very complex task before us?
Sure, no problem. I mean, something I've tried to do in my work is to think about futures for trans people and to you know, use my imagination and try to ask questions that get the audience to also ask questions. I don't just write novels. I'm an artist and theorist, and I write academic books. Most of my work is artwork. And so in the past, since 2008, well, how many years is that? Anyway, in the past bunch of years, I've done a lot of different, you know, kind of experiments to think about what are possibilities out of this seemingly terrible, unchangeable situation. Like transitioning to dragon, or like DIY bulletproof armor, or like mesh network clothing so we could have local community safety networks. And I think, you know, early in your comments, Judith said, are we supposed to shut down our imaginations? Do we accept that? To give up all of the possibilities of life and gender and love that we see before us, or that we can imagine? No, of course not, we're not. But I mean, what I'm trying to do in this novel in particular is to think about imaginative ways out. What if we could make a machine that we could travel to other alternate universes with, other possibilities? I mean, of course, we have that machine. That machine is us. And activism and social movements, that is what that machine is. Yeah. Also, my partner brought our 1-year-old baby from Santa Cruz and just got here, so amazing. There is hope. There is hope in the world.
Babies are definitely hope. Judith, so same question, but I found it very interesting when you talked about coalition building. And so I'd like to ask the same question and throw in coalition building. How do we bring all that around and build coalition when our communities are all over the place?
I have maybe 2 things to say about that. The first is, well, we know from Bernice Johnson Reagan that a coalition is a life-threatening thing, and that if you don't, as she put it, I remember her actually saying this in 1984, shows you my age, that if you don't feel like your life is on the line, you're not doing something right. So the coalitions we have to make are not going to be easy, because the people who don't care about Palestine, or don't care about trans rights, or don't care about migrants and deportations, they might be looking for something else. And they think, oh, we're the dispensable, those of us who care about such issues are the dispensable part of the progressive movement. Like, you know, and I've heard people, like centrist Democrats say, oh my God, why did we support trans people? We brought about our own downfall. Or why did we support migrant rights? Oh my God, that was such a mistake. You know, we brought about our downfall. It's like, oh, so you're gonna sacrifice these vulnerable and courageous communities in order to reclaim a center, and then who will you be for having done that, for having decided that the most vulnerable people can be sacrificed? So that's not an alternative. And yet, what does it mean for those of us who do feel scorned or demeaned to work with people in a party system or on the patriarchal left, which I've always found difficult? You know, you walk in the door and they say, oh, you're a secondary oppression. It's like, oh, do I sit in the second row? You're a tertiary oppression. That one was fun. As if what they call class isn't all of us. As if we're not part of any viable notion of class. We are. And when people lose their employment or their family wealth or their housing because they're trans or they're gender nonconforming or they're queer, or because they are without papers that someone accepts, or because of racism, I mean, these are not cultural issues. These are not even just, identity issues as opposed to class. No, these are class issues. These are questions of economic destitution. And being denied health care is a question of economic destitution. Okay, so let's not. I think we have to be loud and clear to those who say, oh, those are identity issues and they did us in, or we can do away with trans rights or struggles, or the rights of migrants, getting harder to say if you don't like abduction and deportation. But we have to make the case that this is, these are issues of freedom, of equality, of justice, of the most fundamental kind, and they are also profoundly economic as they are profoundly intimate and cultural. They are all of those things at once. So we need to be able to convey that vision in a way that is as compelling as their racist fears are apparently compelling. As compelling or more compelling, obviously, irresistibly compelling, and capable of defeating their transphobic phantasms and their hideous attacks on people of color, and their assault on knowledge, and their assault on the history of slavery and the history of racism and how it is being reproduced in the present. So I do think coalitions are enormously important. I have some comrades who say coalitions are love. And either love is more difficult than I know, which is possible, or I sometimes have to show up with people and struggle with people I do not love, because we are fighting for Palestine, right? We're fighting against genocide, or because we are against racism, and I don't like them all. But why should that be so important? Right? I mean, we have to remember we are not each other's enemy fundamentally. The enemy is these very large structures of oppression, some of which we have internalized, there is no question. But when you know that state violence is your enemy, when you know that radical inequality and extractivist capitalism is your enemy, when you know that transphobia and genocide are your enemies, and we can go on. We really do need to accept that the conflicts between us are there to be worked out in time, but that we keep our eye on what it is we are trying to defeat. And the most radically inclusive feminist movements I know are the ones that emerged from Latin America, where it was really clear that they were fighting state violence and they were fighting street violence. And it was affecting trans people, travestis, women of all kind. It was affecting squatters. It was affecting the indigenous people in the mountains who are trying to keep their lands. Those are amazingly wide coalitions, including unions, including tactical ways of infiltrating unions. And I think that they knew what that violence was. They knew that they didn't want a dictatorship again, that they didn't want the state to have the power to disappear people. And they have sought a much larger notion of coalition and unity. And here I'm thinking of Ni Una Menos in Argentina, which has had such an incredible effect. But also Las Tesis from Chile, for instance, which is brilliant. And that shows us how performance and politics goes together. I don't know if that answers you, but that's what I
It does. It does. Misha, would you like to add anything to coalition building?
I mean, that was amazing. I mean, I think coalition building is essential. I mean, I think I learned about activism in the alter globalization movement, and that was the way we won. That was the way we shut down things like the WTO or the FTAA meeting, was by organizing with people that we didn't necessarily like and didn't necessarily agree with. And it does seem to me like a trend in past, I don't know, decade or so, of people wanting to isolate and organize into smaller and smaller categories, and that there is a need for us to do more organizing with folks that we don't like. And do I feel like coalition is love? Oh God. I mean, I think also coalition can be temporary and strategic. It doesn't have to go on forever. It's not a long-term, it's not an arranged marriage. Like at the Palestine Solidarity encampment at UC Santa Cruz, we did have a coalition of groups emerge to support the encampment. There was a lot of disagreement, and as soon as the encampment was raided and shut down, the coalition rapidly fell apart, which is unfortunate, but yeah, it's difficult, and I think we need more ability to be uncomfortable and still work together.
Those are really powerful thoughts. The idea of doing something, which you said, well, maybe it'll fail, but I got the conversation going. I brought it in, I made it alive. And then these ideas too, that sometimes coalitions, things that we build also have to come apart. Sometimes for something new to come. Sometimes things run their course. I'm really interested in doing something a little bit unexpected. So, not yet, Judith, but very soon. I would like to ask you, Judith, what question you would like to ask Misha?
Misha, I want to know whether you understand yourself as world traveling, in the sense of you move, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, you move between academic spaces, performance spaces, activist spaces. How does that work for you? Is there a translation that goes on for you, or is it part of your own complexity? Are there overlapping moments? Do you feel estrangement sometimes within the academy, given the rest of your life and your work? How would you approach that question?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I try to follow my inspiration, and one of my biggest inspirations is Gloria Anzaldúa, and continues to be. And you know, in Borderlands, what Gloria was doing was, and there's a character named Gloria in this, one of the many references in this book. You know, she was doing poetry and theory and autobiography in English, Spanish, and Nahuatl in the same book. And yeah, I was inspired by that and have tried to be similarly bridging things. It is challenging, but I mean, I think it also allows me to maintain different kinds of commitments. And so like I worked on this project called Local Autonomy Networks, where, like I said, I tried to do workshops around building local safety networks for queer and trans people of color in 11 cities. And you know, in those workshops we had really intense and beautiful conversations about like, how could we, the 7 or 10 of us in this room, actually, what could we actually do to keep each other safe? Like, would you walk home with me? Would you go to the doctor with me? Are you somebody I could call if I get assaulted? Who do you want me to call if something happens to you? If you don't want us to call the police? And you know, then I wrote an academic book about it. So then that work was speaking to different audiences when I was doing that. And that's part of why I do continue to work across those different worlds. But, but also thinking about, I mean, different things have different way of reaching people. You know, thinking about the earlier question about changing the narrative. I collaborated with this group called the Electronic Disturbance Theater. That was a group of 6 artists, and we made this project called the Transborder Immigrant Tool. I think we started in like 2007, and it was a project to see if we could take cheap recycled cell phones that we could buy on the internet and make them life-saving devices, or really do something about people dying at the border of dehydration. So we made a functional prototype that would allow people to find water by collaborating with local organizations who were putting water out in the desert. And then the tool also included poetry, welcoming, but also desert survival poetry, like a poem about what kinds of cacti are poisonous versus what kinds of cacti have drinkable water. And in I guess the collective is like the coalition, but anyway, in the collective we all had different ideas about what our goal was and what had to be done. And definitely Brett Stahlbaum was like, if we don't get it in people's hands and we didn't save any lives and we wasted 5 years working on this. I didn't agree. And Ricardo Dominguez, who was my MFA mentor at the time, also didn't agree and thought that, you know, we're creating a speculative possible future, right? And ultimately it felt like that just opening up the conversation and getting, I mean, it did, we had 3 right-wing Republican congresspeople write to UCSD and say we were guilty of the felony of enticing immigrants to cross the border. So all these investigations. But, I mean, what came out of it was an AP article and hundreds and hundreds of news stories. And thinking about changing the narrative, I did feel like the most important thing about that was just generating conversation, getting people to really face the question, if somebody is dying in the desert of dehydration, do you ask for their papers or do you just give them water?
Do you have a question for Judith?
I mean, so many. I mean, in thinking about Who's Afraid of Gender, I mean, mostly I wanted to ask, how do you think the work in there about this global network of this anti-gender ideology movement and the phantasm of gender. You know, how do we use that now? In, like you said, in a different moment. And you kind of addressed this in your opening, but I mean, I think in the conclusion, when you say what we need to do is make freedom the air we breathe together, you're offering a strategy. Is that still the strategy you would suggest?
Well, I think towards the end of the book, I try to talk about how this so-called anti-gender ideology movement links up with new authoritarianism. And I think that the attacks on gender were mobilized by a variety of conservative organizations and movements and parties and governments in order to restore the idea of the family to the heterosexual family, to restore gender to its binary framework, to support gender hierarchy, and also to impose certain white forms of kinship on white Christian forms of kinship on a wide range of people. So there was always a colonial mission involved in the anti-gender ideology movement. And of course it's paradoxical because the Pope said that gender itself was a colonial force, and sometimes it is, especially with gender mainstreaming and all kinds of organizations that impose ideas of gender on people who don't accept what's being told to them by international organizations. So there is some of that. I guess I would call that imperialism. But we have to remember that the evangelical and Catholic resistance to gender is part of its own colonizing mission, its effort to impose certain white norms of sex and of sexuality and of marriage and of inequality. So my sense now is that we have to understand the emerging and established authoritarianisms in all of their complexity, and we have to make links between them. What is the relationship between the nullification of legal rights for trans and intersex people and non-binary people? So that's a destitution of a basic right that has been established in various places in the world that allows for self-definition at the level of the law and a change of legal status, which is followed by all sorts of entitlements and obligations that relating to citizenship and healthcare and the like. Okay, so the existential nullification of trans, intersex, and non-binary people in the law, by the law, the stripping of citizenship rights to people who are in the process of trying to gain citizenship, or possibly those who were born to parents who were not citizens but born in this country, right? So the birthright issue. The stripping of rights of asylum or of due process when detained or abducted or deported, right? All the international laws that govern what legal fair treatment is when you enter the country, when you live in this country as a resident with temporary papers or in the process of gaining papers, okay? The attack on the homeless, which Gavin Newsom has now undertaken with great manospheric zeal. I mean, what is actually happening across the board? And then, of course, the bearable and continuing genocidal actions of the State of Israel against the Palestinian people as they are left radically defenseless in search of food or in search of medical care. As they search, they are killed. As they approach the food, they are killed. As they are in the home and told to leave because there will be a bombardment, they leave, following the rule, only to get bombarded as they leave. Okay, this the United States is funding. This the European Union is funding, and only now saying maybe something's wrong with this picture. But seriously, I mean, these are interlinked because in each of these cases, state powers, state economies are trying to figure out how fully they can nullify the rights of people, nullify their existence, or disappear their existence, or murder them systematically. I mean, you might think losing rights as a trans non-binary person in the law is nothing. I mean, that's not a thing. Like, who cares? Like, no. The nullification of your legal status is linked to the nullification of legal statuses of all these other people who have rights as international visitors under visas, or who have, students with visas, or the rights of migrants to have a fair and speedy consideration of their petitions, or the right to due process. I mean, these are interlinking rights.
Judith, I'm going to interrupt you.
Please do, I'm so mad. I don't know, like interrupting Judith Butler. I had somebody flashing cards over here at me. I really get I really get the anger, because as you mentioned, Gavin Newsom and his recent kind of excitability around dealing with the homelessness issue, and it does make my blood boil to remember that he got ready for that in San Francisco. Yeah. He came in with this promising so many changes and doing some things that really had a lot of us supporting him, and then turned and changed everything after he had gotten to where he wanted to get. And so there's a lot to be mad about. So I'm sure that some of you in the audience have burning issues to raise, burning questions to raise. And so we're gonna make some space for you to ask questions. And I have just a request of all of you. One is that they be true questions, like if it were in writing, there'd be a total question mark at the end, like super question mark. And no compound questions, please, because I have to have the last question, so we're really limited in time. It's what I get to do because I'm up here. It's part of the perks. I get to ask the last question. So, somebody is in the audience with a mic to bring to you. So, if you have a question,
I actually want you to come down right where I am instead of me come to you. Thank you. And first, we're going to start with our house sound manager, who has been unbelievable all weekend long.
I really appreciated the conversation around coalition building, and how that kind of took a forward step to the conversation about gender. I was wondering, we talked about class in that conversation. What are some experiences or advices that either of you have around organizing across a broader base of people that you might not like or you don't necessarily identify with? Like, what are some tips and tricks to be able to organize across a broader base?
I'm a fan of the affinity spokes council model. I mean, that's what we did in the FTA in Miami, and so, you know, forming small affinity groups with your people, and that might be like your 5 friends, or it might be 15 people who all have a plan, and then having a larger spokes council around a particular issue or campaign, like in that case was the FTA, or maybe the encampment, Palestine Solidarity encampment. Yeah, then people from the affinity groups can come to the spokes councils and try to like come to some agreement. And I also love the idea of that we have to respect the diversity of tactics. So, I mean, I think the people that are in power now don't. I mean, I forget who said this. I think maybe Kianga Yamada Taylor said this, but in a webinar I watched. Anyway, they don't care if you don't like them. They don't care if what they're doing is immoral. They don't. There's no like gonna be convincing Trump or Musk or any of these fuckers that they're gonna like. Oh, you were right. Actually, I'm wrong. You're a person. I thought you were not a human being, but actually you are. That's not gonna happen. So the only thing we could do is actually build our own power to respond to them by having mass movements and by having, you know, breaking shit and blocking some intersections and blocking some bridges like people have done here.
Hi, I want to thank all of you for being here and sharing your knowledge. I appreciate all of you. My question is for Judith. Being a gender studies person and teaching at a college that is a little bit progressive, and I won't say the name of the college, but we have different topics around our gender studies in our comm area. And my question was around future of gender studies. And so what do you see as the most pressing questions or directions for future research and activism with gender studies?
Well, I guess, you know, in relationship to the former question, I was going to say I visited the new college in Florida, which had destroyed gender studies. And then they invited me to the campus, and I thought, and they had actually taken my books and all of the books on gender out of their libraries and thrown them in a bin. And that photograph was well documented in the news. At first I thought this is some kind of terrible joke, and then I thought, no, I'm going. After Trump got elected, and I talked about the importance of gender studies and why they needed to reinstate it. So I used my platform and that invitation to do that. But when I was there, I learned something really important, which is that all the folks who are organizing on these issues, but also on migration issues, and they're interlinked there. Like the trans folks are involved in the migration rights, the migration rights people are supporting the you know, like there's a lot of interconnection there. They were so glad I came, and they said to me, you know, most people refuse to come to Florida now. They don't want to go to Trump states from the coasts, but that means that we're abandoned. You know, we're isolated and we're abandoned. So I think, you know, making connections in some of these states that have been completely overrun, like Texas, which is the next place I want to go, just to like connect with people and to recognize what their struggles are and not to feel abandoned. But look, in this area, maybe you know the East Bay Sanctuary Covenant, or maybe you're online with the student sanctuary movement, which is amazing and is expanding all the time and finding a way to expand through the internet itself. So I think there are, and JVP, right? Jewish Voice for Peace, expanding all the time, including all kinds of incredible tactics and just astonishing generational breadth, I must say. I'm an elder now. But, you know, these are organizations that are are just so important, and they're expanding during this time, and they're finding ways to talk to people who are skeptical, or what they are doing, and taking the patience to lay it out and visit them again and come to their communities and brave it, even when they don't like you. Even when they don't like you.
Okay, we're going to take another question. I want to say, I hope at least some of you are just stretching your legs. Yes, I'm sorry, we're probably not going to be able to take all the questions, but you are welcome to, hang out, try to talk to people afterwards.
I just kind of in imagining futures, I wanted to, because the executive orders are actually not laws, they're just memos that Trump writes. He's actually disregarding a lot of the laws that have existed for a long time, and I just kind of want to ask, like, how do we preserve the law and government as an area of resistance and as a place of, like, just fairness and, some sort of equity in the future? Because it just seems like our government and our laws and our courts are, like, really under siege, and I just really struggle with what that means for future generations and what that means to have people work in government and be in government and how we continue.
Well, I guess I would just say briefly, we might have a disagreement on whether an executive order is a legal document or a memo, but the first one in 2018 was a memo, the last one was not. But look, I am really impressed. Center for Constitutional Rights, even ACLU, centrism loves all centrisms. And move to the left. CCR was always to the left. Center for Constitutional Rights. If you don't know it, it's incredible. But so there's a fine, Lawyers Guild. There's Palestine Legal. All of these organizations are fine, excellent, legal organizations that work in, with, and for social movements. And social movement law work is enormously important, and it's only become more important. And I think that even though many of us tend in a more anarchist direction, and we don't want to think about the law, we don't like the law, we don't want the law, we also have to learn how to use the law in creative ways to secure our freedoms and our futures. So I think it's enormously important at this point that people with legal education, or even willing to apprentice to legal organizations and help people with their asylum papers, for instance. Like if you've got Spanish in this state, give 6 hours of your week to an organization that is trying to help people with their documents. There are a lot of churches involved in this kind of activity. Maybe we're not used to working with churches, but why not? Churches help make the civil rights movement in this country.
Hi, I saw you just speak 20 years ago at UC Santa Cruz, and I'm so happy to be here today, Judith. Thank you. My question is, as a person who works in post-secondary academic environments, this question is really to all of you. How do you manage being in that space as a staff person, being the embodiment of the institution, but also resisting at the same time? What are your guys' thoughts?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's hard. It's a constant struggle. Some things I do are, I don't grade. I have students do all self-evaluation in all of my classes, and then I read their self-evaluations. And I also, a model that I really like, actually, is in our Department of Critical Race and Ethnic Studies at UC Santa Cruz, where we have 3 peer-led classes. So we have Black Radical University, ? And we have PhD, which is Filipino Historical Dialects, and we have Undocu Studies. And all 3 of those classes are classes that are led by students. So the students put the syllabus together in collaboration with the professor. The students lead and teach every single class. The professor only steps in when they ask them to. So there's different approaches. But yeah, just constantly struggling. And whenever the chancellor shows up, like I did last week, ask her, when are we going to divest from genocide?
So we've come to the end of our time, which is so hard. And I have one last question, real quick. Responses, yes? Okay. Otherwise I'll get in trouble. What is one unexpected joy that you have found, experienced in your work on gender and identity?
It has put me in touch with, especially now after this last book, I took a break from gender for a while. I mean, it didn't exactly take a break from me. But after in preparing this last book and in the aftermath, I have been connected with younger people more than I had ever had, and it's actually a beautiful experience.
I would say I've written a lot about transgender studies and about T for T experiences in this book, but the T for T relationship I'm in right now is probably the best I've ever had. So you should try.
Misha, Judith, thank you so much. Thank you all.